At 10 minutes past 11 on a Tuesday morning in October, with Nero Wolfe having descended from his sacred morning communion with the orchids, I was engaged in the day's most pressing intellectual challenge, determining whether the pencil with teeth marks deserved a place of honor or shame on my desk. The decision was postponed by the doorbell, which rang with the kind of authority that suggested the caller wasn't selling magazine subscriptions. Fritz's voice drifted from the hallway, followed by the measured click of heels that had made up their mind about something important. When he appeared in the office doorway, his expression carried that particular blend of respect and caution he reserved for visitors who looked like they could afford Wolfe's fees. "A Miss Celia Valor to see Mr. Wolfe," Fritz announced. "She says it concerns a theatrical matter of some urgency." Wolfe, who had just settled his considerable bulk into the custom-built chair behind his desk, raised his eyes from the morning mail with the expression of a man who had discovered a fly in his soup. "Theatrical," he repeated, as if the word left a bad taste. "I do not attend the theatre, Fritz. I do not patronize it, support it, or acknowledge its existence except as a regrettable fact of urban life." "Nevertheless," came a crisp voice from behind Fritz, "you may find this particular theatrical matter worth your attention." The woman who stepped into the office was somewhere in her late 30s, with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested she was accustomed to solving problems before they became crises. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that meant business, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her authority the hard way. Under one arm, she held what appeared to be a strip of deep red velvet, folded with the care usually reserved for important documents. "The client's tale." Wolfe gestured toward the red leather chair with the resignation of a man accepting an inevitable inconvenience. "Miss Valor, I presume? You may sit, though I should warn you that my knowledge of theatrical matters extends no further than my awareness that they exist to inconvenience traffic." She settled into the chair with practiced efficiency. "I'm the general manager of the Regent Lyric Theatre, Mr. Wolfe. We're in the final weeks of preparation for a new production, a play called The Secret, and someone is systematically sabotaging our efforts." "Sabotage," Wolfe repeated, his tone suggesting he found the word only marginally more palatable than theatrical. "Define your terms, Miss Valor. Are we speaking of bombs and bullets or something more subtle?" "Much more subtle and therefore more dangerous." She unfolded the velvet strip across her knees, revealing the rich burgundy fabric that frames theatre stages. "This is a section of our grand drape border. I had it cut this morning, which will cost me my job if the board discovers it. But I needed to show you this." She turned the fabric to reveal the inside hem where faint white chalk marks were visible, the kind of notations any theater professional would recognize as technical cues. But there was something else. Small indentations along the seam where something had been sewn in and later removed. "We've been finding notes," she continued, folded small and stitched into our curtains and drapes. "At first, we thought it was some quirky habit of a former employee. Little reminders about cue timings or technical adjustments. Then we found this." From her purse, she produced an envelope addressed in neat block letters to our brownstone. Inside was a piece of onion skin paper with a message that made Wolfe's eyebrows rise a fraction of an inch. "There is a line nobody hears, and yet everybody obeys. It is drawn behind the curtain. Ask Mr. Wolfe what is sewn to keep it straight. Your admirer." The hook deepens. Wolfe studied the note without touching it, his dark eyes moving across the careful handwriting with the intensity of a jeweler examining a suspicious diamond. "Someone has presumed to involve me in your theatrical difficulties," he said finally. "That constitutes an intrusion, Miss Valor. I dislike intrusions." "Then help me stop them," she replied. "Because this isn't just about mysterious notes. Our investors have been receiving anonymous letters containing dialogue from scenes we cut weeks ago, scenes that were never made public. Our technical cues are being subtly altered, lights that dim a beat too late, curtains that catch just enough to cast unwanted shadows. Nothing dramatic enough to stop the show, but everything calculated to undermine confidence. I had been taking notes, but now I looked up. Who has access to your rehearsal scripts and technical systems? That's the problem, Miss Valor said. Too many people. The playwright, Marston Grieve, is famous for his neurotic attention to detail. The lead actress, Tamsin Vale, insists on script changes right up to opening night. Our set designer, Ruth Candle, used to be romantically involved with Grieve, which adds a layer of personal tension. The producer, Laidlaw Morrow, has his business manager, Leo Bricks, monitoring every aspect of the production. Any of them could be responsible, or it could be someone else entirely. Wolfe was quiet for a long moment. His fingers drummed once against his desk, a sign that something about the case had caught his interest. "The handwriting on this note," he said eventually, "is familiar to me. I've seen it before, though I cannot immediately place where." "The decision." "Miss Valor," Wolfe said, "your fee will be $3,000 as a retainer, plus expenses. You will instruct Mr. Morrow's business manager to prepare for additional costs. In return, I will identify your saboteur and determine why my name has been dragged into your theatrical complications." She wrote the check without hesitation, which told me 2 things. The Regent Lyric had serious money behind it, and Miss Valor was desperate enough to pay whatever it took to solve her problem. "There are conditions," Wolfe continued. "You will bring the individuals most closely connected to your production here. To this office, at times I will specify. You will tell no one that I am investigating on your behalf. If any reporter learns of my involvement, the fee doubles immediately." "Agreed," she said, standing and carefully refolding the velvet strip. "When do you want to see them?" "Not yet. First, Archie will visit your theater, observe your people, and ask the kind of questions that will make them uncomfortable. Theater people, I'm told, are accustomed to drama. Let us see how they respond to genuine scrutiny." After Miss Valor left, I turned to Wolfe, who was already reaching for his morning paper. "So what hooked you? The money, the mystery, or the fact that someone's using your name in their little theater games?" He glanced up from the financial pages. "The handwriting, Archie. It belongs to someone who measures things in spans rather than inches, someone familiar with the precise placement of objects in space. Our saboteur is not merely familiar with theater. They understand the mathematics of illusion." Setting the stage. "You'll go to the Regent Lyric this afternoon," Wolfe continued. "Learn the geography of their building, the personalities of their people, and the nature of their relationships. Theater, I am told, is an art form built on the tension between what the audience sees and what remains hidden. In this case, someone is manipulating both sides of that equation." I checked my watch and reached for my hat. "Any particular approach you want me to take?" "Be yourself, Archie. Ask impertinent questions, observe everything, and trust no one's version of events. Someone in that theater knows exactly why my name appeared in their curtain hymn, and I intend to discover not only who, but why they felt compelled to involve me in their deception." As I headed for the door, Wolfe called after me. "And Archie, pay particular attention to anyone who seems overly eager to help. In my experience, the most helpful people often have the most to hide." The Regent Lyric Theatre was waiting, with its secrets sewn into the very fabric of its curtains. Someone had drawn Nero Wolfe into their web of theatrical intrigue, and that someone was about to discover that involving the world's most stubborn detective in their schemes was a mistake they would soon regret. The game, as they say in the theater, was about to begin. If you've ever seen a fortress breached by a polite knock, you can picture what the brownstone felt like that Tuesday afternoon. I was halfway to the hat rack, ready to pay my respects to the Regent Lyric's ghosts, when Fritz's expression signaled a culinary crisis, or worse, a social one. The doorbell rang again, insistent as a newsboy with a scoop. And this time. The brownstone's peace was about to be tested by outsiders with more clout than courtesy. Fritz ushered in two men who wore their ambitions like tailored suits: Laidlaw Morrow, the Regent Lyrics producer, and Leo Brix, his business manager. Morrow's smile was the kind that could launch 1,000 fundraising galas. Brix's was all calculation, as if he was already working out how much this meeting was costing per minute. "Mr. Wolfe," Morrow began, after I'd made the introductions and reminded them to respect Fritz's polished floors. "We're here regarding Miss Valler's initiative." "You're here to tell us to drop the case," I supplied. "I've seen smoother attempts, but I appreciate the directness." Wolfe hadn't risen. He never does for anyone who isn't delivering orchids or beer. He regarded them with the same interest he might give a new fungus, possibly useful, potentially toxic. Brix leaned forward, voice gritty. "We'd like you to reconsider your engagement. The theatre's a delicate ecosystem. Scandal could spook investors, and Miss Valler overstepped by hiring outside help." Morrow's tone was velvet over steel. "We simply want to align expectations, Mr. Wolfe. Discretion is vital. A detective's presence can be misinterpreted." Wolfe's gaze was unwavering. "Miss Valler is my client. I do not relinquish cases at another's convenience, nor do I indulge in indiscretion." Before the air could freeze solid, the doorbell chimed again. Fritz, part butler, part early warning system, returned with a woman who brought a gust of October with her. Tamsin Vale, the Regent Lyrics' leading lady, entered as if she owned both stage and script. "I'm interrupting, aren't I?" she declared, eyes scanning Morrow and Brix with the familiarity of someone who's seen the strings behind every curtain. "Isn't that delicious?" She offered a quick smile, then presented a folded triangle of burgundy velvet. Stage trim, with a hem so crisp it could have cut gossip in half. "A sample from our house to yours," she said, passing it to me with a playful flourish. I took it with a handkerchief, Wolfe's rules of contamination echoing in my head. The inside hem bore faint chalk marks and, more tellingly, a smudge of grey residue. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Graphite," he murmured. "From a lead chain, likely. Someone's added weight where there ought to be none. To pull the curtain's line or to draw attention." Tamsin's smile was theatrical, but her eyes were sharp. "Someone wants you looking in a particular place, Mr. Wolfe. I'm here to suggest you look elsewhere." Brix, bristling, tried to reclaim the initiative. "On behalf of the Lyric, I request you return Miss Valler's retainer and keep out of our affairs." I grinned. "On behalf of your accountant's blood pressure, sit down." Wolfe raised a hand. "Amnesty. Or perhaps an intermission." "Enough. Miss Vale, leave the sample. Mr. Morrow, prepare to accommodate my inquiries. Mr. Brix, stop threatening me. It's an expenditure of breath with no return." The trio departed in a flurry of controlled civility. At the threshold, Tamsin tossed a final line over her shoulder. "If you're going to save us, do it fast. 2 weeks until opening, and every day the stakes get higher." When the door closed, Wolfe addressed me without looking up. "The residue is not random. It is theatre logic. A line drawn, a weight added, a message meant for me. Go, Archie. Learn their geography, their relationships, and their secrets. Someone is directing this performance, and I wish to know their name before the final act." The Regent Lyric Theatre, when I arrived, was a study in anxious anticipation. The lobby smelled of old velvet and fresh paint, and the backstage corridors twisted like a playwright's plot. Tommy Raish, the assistant stage manager, greeted me with the wary hope of a man praying I'd solve problems rather than add to them. Tommy led me through the maze, dressing rooms cluttered with costumes, storage spaces crammed with sets from seasons past, and the main stage itself dominated by the infamous red velvet curtain. He pointed out where the first note was found, a hem meticulously stitched, nearly invisible. "Whoever did it knew their trade," he said. "Thread matched, seam reinforced. Only someone familiar with the mechanics would bother." I made the rounds, observing rehearsals, someone catching the cast at their most revealing. Marston Grieve, the playwright, was dictating nuance with a precision that bordered on mania. Tamsin Vale, now in rehearsal garb, commanded the stage with both talent and temperament. Ruth Candle, the set designer, was orchestrating scenery changes with a painter's eye and a general's authority. Morrow, the producer, and Brix, the accountant, hovered at the edges, each with their own stake in the production's fate. The tension was as thick as the curtain's velvet. Grieve's pride, Vale's ambition, Candle's past with Grieve, Morrow's financial anxieties, and Brix's cold calculations, all knotted together, each with reason enough to sabotage or protect the show. The sabotage, notes, weighted curtains, altered cues, could only come from an insider. As I finished my circuit, my phone buzzed. Fritz, never a man to waste words, sounded strained. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Morrow is here. He insists on seeing Mr. Wolfe. He is agitated." So the disturbance had come full circle, from the theatre's footlights to the sanctum of the brownstone. Someone had raised the stakes, and the next move would be ours. The October afternoon had turned sharp by the time I returned to the brownstone, and I found Wolfe in his office with a glass of beer and the kind of expression that suggested someone had been rearranging his universe without permission. 3 opened envelopes lay scattered across his desk like evidence of a small invasion. "Archie," he said without looking up, "our theatrical friends have been prolific correspondents." I settled into my chair and examined the letters. Each bore the same neat block lettering we'd seen that morning, but these were addressed to different recipients. One to Laidlaw Morrow's office, one to Ruth Candle's studio, and one delivered directly to our door. The messages were brief but pointed, each tailored to its target with surgical precision. "Someone's been busy," I observed. "What do they say?" "Threats disguised as observations," Wolfe replied. "Our correspondent is escalating, which suggests either desperation or confidence. Perhaps both." He gestured toward the red leather chair. "Tell me what you learned at their theater." The playwright's obsession. I gave him the full tour, starting with the most obvious suspect. Marston Grieve, the playwright, runs that production like a field marshal directing a siege. The man stopped a rehearsal for 20 minutes because someone moved a chair 6 inches to the left. He's got notebooks full of precise staging notes, timing charts, even sketches of how the curtain should hang. If someone wanted to sabotage the technical elements, they'd need exactly that level of detail. Obsessive precision, Wolfe noted. Beyond obsessive. But here's the interesting part. Greve keeps his production materials locked in an upstairs office. Miss Valla has a key, Morrow probably has one, and Leo Brix considers locks a personal insult. The cut scenes that showed up in those investor letters, they're in Grieve's files and the stage manager's binder. That's it. The actress's calculation. Tamsin Vale presents a different kind of threat, I continued. She's memorized not just her own part, but the entire script, including the scenes that were cut. When I mentioned the missing dialogue, she didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed, like someone had revealed a secret she was saving for the right moment. She's treating this production like a military campaign, learning every entrance, every exit, every technical cue in the building. Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. Ambitious? Calculating. This is her first starring role in a major production, and she's not leaving anything to chance. She delivered that weighted curtain sample to us personally, remember. She's either genuinely concerned or trying to steer our investigation away from something she doesn't want us to find. The designer's expertise. Ruth Candle is the most technically dangerous of the bunch, I went on. She's Grieve's ex-girlfriend, which adds personal motivation to professional capability. She understands both the artistic and mechanical sides of the production, where every curtain hangs, how every piece of rigging works, which chains are supposed to be weighted and which aren't. I watched her during rehearsal. Every time Grave praised Tamsin's performance, Candle's jaw tightened just a little. "A woman scorned with expert knowledge," Wolfe observed, "and access to everything. Tommy Reich told me she practically lives in the fly gallery. If someone wanted to alter curtain weights or tamper with technical cues, she'd be the one who could do it without being noticed." The financial pressure. Laidlaw Morrow, the producer, is feeling the heat from investors who are getting nervous about anonymous letters containing inside information. He's got that cocktail party charm, but underneath he's worried about his reputation and his bank account. He tried to get us to drop the case, which could mean he's protecting someone or protecting himself. And his business manager. Leo Bricks is the kind of accountant who counts paper clips and measures coffee and drops. He's got keys to everything, access to all financial records, and the temperament of a man who believes humidity is theft. He's on a percentage of the profits, so he claims he wants the show to succeed. But he's also the type who might see sabotage as a way to expose financial mismanagement or trigger an insurance payout. The pattern emerges. Wolfe was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming once against the desk. 5 suspects, each with access, expertise, and motive. But more importantly, each with a different relationship to Miss Vala, our client. She stands at the center of their conflicts, mediating between Grieve and Candle, managing Tamsin's demands, balancing Morrow's financial concerns, dealing with Bricks's cold calculations. "Someone's using her as a focal point," I agreed. "The question is whether they're trying to destroy her reputation or use her as cover for something else." The doorbell rang, and Fritz appeared with his diplomatic expression. "Mr. Wolfe, Miss Candle is here. She says it concerns the letters that were delivered this afternoon." Wolfe nodded. "Show her in, Fritz." Ruth Candle entered with the controlled energy of someone who had spent the afternoon making difficult decisions. She was younger than I'd expected, with practical beauty and the kind of steady hands that came from years of building things that had to stand upright under pressure. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, settling into the red leather chair, "someone is trying to frame me for this sabotage, and I need your help to prove it." Wolfe studied her with the attention of a jeweler examining a stone of uncertain value. "Frame you, Miss Candle. That suggests you know who is responsible." "I have evidence," she replied, opening a portfolio and spreading technical drawings across his desk. "Someone stole the originals of these from my studio last week. They're using my own designs to plan their sabotage." The drawings showed the Regent Lyrics rigging system in precise detail, with small notations that would tell an expert exactly how to alter weights, adjust tensions, and modify technical cues without detection. Wolfe examined the drawings without touching them. "And you believe you know who took them?" Ruth Candle's smile was sharp as a stage knife. "Mr. Wolfe, I know exactly who took them. The question is whether you're prepared to help me prove it." The circle of suspects had just tightened considerably, and someone was about to discover that involving Nero Wolfe in their theatrical deceptions was a mistake they would regret. Ruth Candle left her technical drawings spread across Wolfe's desk like evidence in a court case, along with her promise to reveal the identity of her suspected saboteur once I'd done the preliminary spade work. Wolfe studied the precise mechanical drawings with the attention of a jeweler examining a suspicious stone, then delivered his usual economical instructions. "Verify her claims about the theft," he said. "Then determine which of our theatrical friends possesses both the expertise and the opportunity to execute such calculated mischief. Someone is directing this performance from the shadows, Archie, and I wish to know their name before the final curtain." The designer's domain. Ruth Candle's studio occupied the 6th floor of a building in the garment district that still believed in steam heat and the kind of freight elevators that made you grateful for modern safety regulations. The hallway carried the familiar perfume of creative chaos, sawdust, yesterday's coffee, and paint that would remain tacky until spring arrived. Inside, organized disorder reigned supreme. A half-painted architectural cornice rested on sawhorses like a sleeping giant, while a detailed scale model of the Regent Lyrics stage sat under protective glass. A miniature battlefield where every rope and curtain had been positioned with military precision. An acetylene welding rig sulked in one corner, and rolls of technical drawings stood at attention along the walls. Nell Pritchard, Candle's assistant, was a freckled woman in paint-stained coveralls who handled steel like it had personally offended her. She didn't waste time pretending to be impressed by my credentials. "Miss Candle's out supervising a rigging adjustment," she said, "and if this is about those stolen drawings, we already called building security. Fat lot of good it did us." She led me to a steel flat file cabinet that looked like it could survive a direct hit from a wrecking ball. The bottom drawer showed clear signs of expert tampering, not the crude work of a crowbar, but the delicate scratches left by someone with time, patience, and a proper set of lock picks. "Who had keys to this cabinet?" I asked. "Ruth, myself, and Tommy Raish borrowed a set last month for an overnight build. He returned them on schedule. Also, Leo Bricks came by 3 weeks ago demanding copies of the rigging drawings for what he called budget verification. Ruth told him to verify his own budget and keep his hands off her files." "Did he get copies anyway?" Nell's shrug was eloquent. "He's got the personality of a bank vault and about as much charm. I didn't hand him anything voluntarily." I examined the scale model more closely. The line sets were labeled in Ruth's precise handwriting, but line set 14 had an additional pencil mark, faint but deliberate, indicating a secondary batten that wasn't part of the original design. "Who else knew about that secondary batten?" I asked. "Ruth, obviously. Tommy Raish, anyone who studied the complete technical drawings. We designed it but never installed it. Too expensive for the budget. But if someone wanted to add unauthorized weight to a curtain or alter its full pattern, that's exactly where they'd do it." The night visitor. On my way out, I had a conversation with the building's night doorman, a man who resembled a cigar store Indian and was nearly as talkative. His logbook, however, was more forthcoming. One late entry caught my attention. T. Vale had signed in at 10:40 p.m. 2 nights earlier, accompanied by a guest whose signature was illegible. The Regent Lyric was buzzing with nervous energy when I arrived for the second phase of my investigation. Rehearsal was in progress, and I watched Tamsin Vale command the stage with the kind of magnetic presence that made electricians forget to scratch themselves. When they broke for notes, I cornered her at the edge of the proscenium. The actress's research. "You keep interesting hours, Miss Vale," I said. "Paid a visit to Candle's studio the other night." She didn't flinch, which was either the mark of innocence or excellent training. "I take my craft seriously, Mr. Goodwin. Those sets are extensions of the story, and I needed to understand some critical sight lines for my performance." "Alone?" Her smile carried just enough warmth to be dangerous. "With Marston. We had a creative disagreement about shadow placement during my big monologue. He believes the words should carry all the emotional weight. I think the lighting should provide counterpoint. Did your research include examining technical drawings?" "We examined many things, Mr. Goodwin. Some of them happened to be on paper." Her gaze flicked toward the fly gallery above us, then back to my face. "If you're hunting for thieves, look for people who crave recognition they're not getting, not people who already have the spotlight." The playwright's precision. I found Marston Grieve in his upstairs office, a converted dressing room that still retained its theatrical mirror surrounded by lights. He sat at a table covered with index cards arranged in patterns that probably made sense to him and no one else. A metronome ticked with mechanical precision, not fast, not slow, but with the steady rhythm of a patient heart. "You visited Candle's studio with Miss Vale at 10:40 p.m., I said without preamble. "I visit many studios," he replied without looking up from his cards. "Theater is a collaborative art, Mr. Goodwin. Collaboration requires communication. Did your collaboration include picking locks?" He stopped the metronome with 2 precise fingers. "If you believe my talents extend to petty theft, You have a remarkably low opinion of my artistic capabilities. I think you appreciate control, I said. Control includes understanding every technical aspect of your production. You ever spend time in the fly gallery? He considered this, then shook his head. I write about gravity, Mr. Goodwin. I don't tempt it personally. A stagehand later contradicted this, mentioning he'd seen Grieve in the fly gallery the previous week, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Tommy Reich about cue timing. Perhaps the playwright's relationship with gravity was more complex than he cared to admit. The accountant's expertise. Leo Brix was exactly where I expected to find him, in a cramped office that smelled of ledger books and anxiety, reviewing what appeared to be insurance policies with the enthusiasm of a man planning for disaster. He had a rolled spreadsheet under one arm and a pen behind his ear that looked permanently attached. You asked Candell for copies of the rigging drawings, I said. I request documentation for everything, he replied. Transparency reduces unpleasant surprises. You familiar with line set 14? His blink was almost imperceptible. The secondary batten was a luxury item. We eliminated it during budget review. Interesting, I said. You refer to it in the past tense, as if you'd seen it on paper. I monitor all expenditures, Mr. Goodwin. I don't climb ladders or adjust rigging, but I understand the systems well enough to evaluate their costs. What he hadn't explained was how he'd acquired such detailed knowledge of theater mechanics. That question was answered when I noticed a small, worn leather handbook on his desk, an old stage manager's guide filled with archaic terms for rigging and lighting, curious reading material for a man who claimed to avoid ladders. The producer's pressure. Laidlaw Morrow was easier to read than a billboard. The worried lines on his face could have served as a roadmap to his anxieties, and his nervous energy filled the room like cigarette smoke. Celia Valla is competent, he told me when I asked about the theater's management. She holds the chaos together when everyone else is falling apart. Then why try to convince Wolfe to drop the case this morning? He sighed like a man carrying the weight of other people's money. Because a detective in a theater announces trouble in capital letters, and investors hear those announcements as prophecies of doom. I'm trying to save the production from gossip becoming self-fulfilling prophecy. Who benefits if the show fails before opening night? No one, he said immediately. Then, after a pause, all right, perhaps someone who's positioned to profit from a postponement, or someone who believes sabotage creates leverage for renegotiating contracts, ownership points, or billing arrangements. You've been around long enough to understand how these things work. The pattern emerges. By the time I headed back to the brownstone, I'd collected more contradictions than a politician's campaign promises. Outside the theater, I noticed a delivery truck unloading a crate marked lead chain spun, while two men in work clothes directed it toward the rigging shop. Special order, one of them told me when I inquired. Rush job, paid in cash. Someone with very specific requirements. Inside the crate, the chain links were thin and dull gray, exactly the type that could be sewn into curtain hems without detection until the moment of truth arrived. The report. Wolfe was exactly where I'd left him, with one addition: a sealed envelope bearing Laidlaw Morrow's letterhead sat on his desk beside a magnifying glass. Report, he said without looking up. I laid out the evidence, Candell's expertly picked lock and her assistant's testimony, Tamsin's late-night research expedition with Grieve, the playwright's denial about visiting the fly gallery contradicted by witness testimony, Brix's suspicious familiarity with theater mechanics and his collection of technical manuals, the fresh delivery of lead chain paid for in cash, and the general atmosphere of creative people under pressure making increasingly poor decisions. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed, processing the information with the methodical precision of a master chef evaluating ingredients. Contradictions, he said when I finished. At least half a dozen, I agreed. Greve claims he avoids the rigging area, but witnesses place him there. Brix insists he doesn't involve himself in technical matters, but he knows the systems too well. Tamsin admits to visiting Candle's studio but frames it as artistic research. And someone with cash and specific requirements just purchased exactly the type of chain we found residue from on that curtain sample. They are all performing, Archie, Wolfe said, opening his eyes. The question is whether they're following someone else's script or improvising their own deceptions. He gestured toward Morrow's unopened envelope. Open that carefully. I suspect one of our theatrical friends has just forgotten who is supposed to control the curtain in this particular drama. The investigation was deepening, and someone in that theater was about to discover that involving Nero Wolfe in their elaborate deception was a mistake they would soon regret. The second act was about to begin, and the real performance was just getting started. Morrow's envelope sat on Wolfe's desk like an unwelcome guest making itself comfortable. The letterhead was expensive, the contents predictable, a polite but firm request that we cease our investigation in the interests of all parties concerned. What made it interesting wasn't the message, but the delivery method, hand-delivered by messenger at 3:15, according to Fritz's precise notation, while I was conducting my afternoon rounds at the theater. Standard producer panic, I observed, tossing the letter back onto the desk. Morrow's worried about bad publicity spooking his investors. Wolfe grunted without looking up from the morning mail. Predictable. What concerns me more is the timing. Mr. Morrow felt compelled to send this message within hours of our accepting the case. Someone is orchestrating these reactions, Archie, and I dislike being conducted. That's when Fritz appeared in the doorway with an expression I'd seen only twice before. Once when someone had used his best carving knife to open a paint can, and once when a client had helped himself to beer from the kitchen refrigerator. It was the look of a man whose universe had been subtly but unforgivably disturbed. The discovery. Mr. Wolfe, Fritz said with the controlled precision of a diplomat announcing war, someone has been in the kitchen. Wolfe's head came up like a hunting dog catching scent. In our house, Fritz's kitchen was more sacred than a cathedral and twice as well defended. Explain. The marjoram was moved to the front of the second shelf. I keep it behind the oregano, always. The paprika jar was returned with the label facing inward. I never leave it that way. And this. He held up a small square of linen cloth. Gray dust on the rim of the paprika jar. Very fine, like pencil lead. I was already moving toward my desk, that familiar chill creeping up my spine. The top right drawer, where I'd locked the original anonymous note that morning, opened smoothly under my key. Inside, everything appeared normal. Paper clips, stapler, pencils, notepads, business cards. Everything except the rectangular absence where the onion skin paper should have been. It's gone, I said. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Puis. The investigation. Who has been in this office since 11 this morning? Wolfe asked Fritz. Mr. Morrow and Mr. Brix together, Miss Vale alone, and later Miss Candle with her drawings. You and Mr. Goodwin were present for the first 3 visits. Miss Candle came while Mr. Goodwin was at the theater. I examined the drawer more carefully. No scratches on the lock, no disturbance of the other contents. Whoever had done this possessed both the skill to pick locks cleanly and the knowledge to know exactly what they were looking for. The wastebasket, Wolfe said quietly. I emptied it onto the floor. Among the usual debris was a small clipping of onion skin paper, just a corner, but enough to confirm what we already knew. Someone had taken our evidence and left us a calling card to prove it. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes moving systematically around the office. Archie, examine the surface of my desk. I did, using his magnifying glass. Near the blotter, almost invisible against the leather, lay a tiny curled thread. Red silk, finer than sewing thread, but unmistakably the same. Burgundy shade as our curtain samples. The pattern emerges. 2 violations, Wolfe said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of distant thunder. One practical, the theft of evidence from a locked drawer. One symbolic, the rearrangement of Fritz's kitchen to announce the intruder's presence. Both require intimate knowledge of our routines and our psychology. He picked up the thread with tweezers, studying it under the magnifying glass. This is not random mischief, Archie. Our correspondent knows that Fritz's displaced spices will disturb me more than a broken window, and that stealing evidence will anger me more than threats. This person has observed us carefully. Observed us how? I demanded. We haven't been to their theater before today. None of these people have been in our house before this morning. Haven't they? Wolfe's gaze was steady. Consider the precision, Archie. The intruder knew which drawer contained our evidence, knew Fritz's kitchen well enough to move specific items in ways that would be noticed, knew exactly how to violate our sanctuary without breaking it. This suggests either supernatural powers of observation or prior familiarity with our methods. The escalation. Fritz returned with a small envelope that had been slipped under the kitchen door while we were examining the office. Inside, on cheap typing paper, was a message in the same block letters. The curtain rises on Act 2. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the director is ready for his close-up. But remember, Mr. Wolfe, in theater, the audience only sees what happens in front of the curtain. The real drama happens backstage. Your devoted admirer. Wolfe read it twice, then set it down with the care reserved for live ammunition. Archie, call Miss Valor. Inform her that I require the presence of all principals in this office tomorrow afternoon. Mr. Grieve and Miss Vale at 4 o'clock, Mr. Morrow and Mr. Bricks at 5, Miss Candle at 6. Tell her nothing about today's developments. You're staggering the entrances, I observed. I am arranging a performance, he corrected. Our anonymous correspondent wishes to direct this drama from the shadows. I intend to bring them into the light, whether they wish it or not. The declaration. As I reached for the phone, Wolfe's voice stopped me. Archie, this is no longer merely a case of theatrical sabotage. Someone has presumed to treat my house as their stage, my office as their prop room, and my methods as their script. That constitutes a personal affront of the highest order. His tone was conversational, but I'd heard that particular note before, usually just before someone discovered that involving Nero Wolfe in their schemes was the worst mistake of their considerably shortened career. They want a performance, he continued, reaching for his beer with deliberate calm. Very well. Tomorrow afternoon we shall give them one, but I will write the final act, and I will choose when the curtain falls. The brownstone had been violated, our evidence stolen, our routines mocked. Someone had made the fatal error of bringing their theatrical games into Wolfe's sanctuary. The subtle trespass had escalated into open warfare, and our mysterious correspondent was about to discover that Nero Wolfe's stage was considerably more dangerous than any theater. The second act was about to begin, and this time we would control the script. If you've ever had the feeling that your front stoop was being measured for a coffin, you'll understand what I felt at 9:43 that Wednesday morning. The grey sedan parked across from our brownstone had been there since 8:15, according to Fritz's precise notation, and its occupant was doing a better job of pretending to read the sports page than actually following the Yankees' pennant chances. I gave Wolfe the situation in 20 words or less. He didn't waste energy looking up from his morning mail. You will call Mr. Panzer, he said with the calm of a man who had expected this development. Someone wishes to observe our methods. We shall return the courtesy with interest. The professional touch. Saul Panzer arrived 18 minutes later because Saul treats punctuality like a religious obligation. He glanced at the sedan through our front window with the casual interest of a man pricing vegetables, then turned to Wolfe with the economy of language they both preferred. Standard surveillance, Saul said. Amateur hour. You want him identified or discouraged? Both, in that order, Wolfe replied. But first, examine our basement. Someone violated this house yesterday, and I wish to know the full extent of their trespass. While Saul conducted his methodical investigation, the phone rang with the persistence of a bill collector. Celia Vala's voice carried the strain of a woman juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle in a windstorm. "Mr. Wolfe, we've had another incident. Someone broke into the theater last night and tampered with our fly gallery. 2 sections of the Grand Drape's lead chain were replaced with lighter links. If we'd flown the curtain during tonight's technical rehearsal without checking, it would have pulled crooked and potentially damaged the rigging." "Describe the replacement chain," Wolfe said. "Professional work, according to Tommy Reich. Same gauge, same finish, but lighter alloy. The crimp sleeves were stamped with a G instead of our usual supplier's P marking. Whoever did this knew exactly which sections to replace for maximum effect with minimum visibility. The trail leads forward. After Saul confirmed that our basement had been examined, someone had opened the furnace maintenance panel and left a note about foundations and structural support. I headed to Greenpoint Rigging with one of the suspect crimp sleeves in an evidence envelope. The counterman at Greenpoint had forearms like bridge cables and the conversational style of a man who charged by the syllable. But the crimp sleeve made him cooperative. "Yesterday, 8:10 p.m., he said, turning the sleeve in his massive palm. "Cash sale. Called ahead. Knew the difference between a border chain and a teaser weight, so not some rube off the street. Asked specifically for 1/4-inch links with G sleeves. Description: medium height, raincoat, hat pulled down, voice like a man who reads numbers for a living. Precise about quantities, didn't blink at the rush charge. Receipt?" He slid a carbon copy across the counter. The job was listed as Theatre, line 14. The exact line set that Ruth Candle had designed a secondary baton for before budget constraints killed it. Someone with intimate knowledge of the Regent Lyric's technical specifications had purchased exactly the materials needed to sabotage their rigging. The confrontation escalates. Back at the brownstone, Saul was waiting with his report, and the kind of expression that suggested unpleasant discoveries. "Your watcher is Hugh Cogan," he said without preamble. "Freelance surveillance, works for attorneys and private parties. He's been paid by Leo Bricks to monitor this address and report your movements." "The accountant hires eyes," I observed. "Gets better," Saul continued. I followed Cogan to a lunch meeting at Bryant Park. Bricks handed him an envelope and gave him new instructions. "From the lip reading, Bricks wants to know everyone who enters and leaves this building, with particular attention to timing." Wolfe's fingers drummed once against his desk, a sign that the pieces were arranging themselves into a pattern he recognized. "Mr. Bricks is either directing this sabotage or serving someone who is. Either way, he has made the mistake of bringing his theatrical games to my doorstep." At 4:30, the phone rang. The voice was distorted, not mechanically, but by someone deliberately altering their speech pattern. "Mr. Wolfe, you're investigating matters that don't concern you. Drop the case, return Miss Vala's retainer, and go back to your orchids. Continue, and you'll discover that some curtains conceal more than you want to see." Wolfe's response was characteristically economical. "Who is this?" "Someone who understands the difference between performance and reality. The theater is a dangerous place for people who don't know which is which." The line went dead, leaving us with confirmation that we'd touched a nerve and considerably less patience for anonymous threats. The strategic response. "Archie," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer with deliberate calm. "Inform Miss Vala that tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock I require the presence of all principals in this office, all of them together with no exceptions." "You're accelerating the timeline," I observed. "Our correspondent has forced my hand," he replied. "They violated my house, hired surveillance to watch my movements, and presumed to threaten me by telephone. Tomorrow evening I will demonstrate the difference between amateur theatrics and professional detection." Saul slipped out to continue monitoring Kogan, while I prepared for what promised to be an interesting confrontation. Someone at the Regent Lyric Theatre had made the fatal error of bringing their elaborate deception into Nero Wolfe's carefully ordered world. They were about to discover that involving the world's most stubborn detective in their schemes was a mistake they would regret for whatever remained of their considerably shortened career. The pressure was mounting, and tomorrow evening's gathering would determine who was really pulling the strings in this particular drama. When Nero Wolfe decides to take control of a situation, he doesn't announce it with fanfare or dramatic gestures. He simply begins moving pieces on a chessboard that his opponents didn't realize they were playing on. Thursday morning found him in his office, apparently absorbed in orchid catalogues, but actually orchestrating what would prove to be the most methodical dismantling of a criminal conspiracy I'd witnessed in years. "Archie," he said without looking up from a particularly fascinating description of Catalea hybrids, "our theatrical friends have made the mistake of believing they control this performance. We shall demonstrate otherwise." He set down the catalogue with the deliberate precision of a man loading ammunition. "You will prepare 3 documents, copies of our original anonymous note, each with microscopic variations that only careful examination would reveal. One will have a barely perceptible double strike on the letter I in line. One will bear a faint crease in the lower right corner. The third will show a trace of graphite along the left margin." The tactical deployment. Fritz appeared with 3 envelopes and a small vial of clear powder that would leave invisible traces under ultraviolet light. Wolfe's instructions were characteristically precise. Each envelope would be placed where specific suspects would encounter them, announcing the existence of a second note containing names and methods, promising revelations that didn't yet exist. The first goes to Tommy Reich's desk at the theater, unlocked, visible, irresistible to anyone with access to the stage management office. The second to Leo Brix's inbox, where his compulsive need to examine every piece of paper will defeat his caution. The third to Ruth Candle's studio, under the glass, protecting her scale model, where only someone familiar with her workspace would think to look. I was already reaching for my hat when the phone rang. Fritz answered with his usual diplomatic precision, then appeared in the doorway with an expression I'd seen only when someone had violated the sacred order of his kitchen. "Mr. Wolfe, Miss Candle is here. She says someone has taken something that belongs to her." The personal escalation. Ruth Candle entered carrying, herself with the controlled fury of someone who had discovered that their private world was no longer private. She held a small canvas pet carrier that moved with feline indignation. "Someone broke into my apartment last night," she said without preamble. "They took nothing except Duchess, my cat, and left her in the theater's fly gallery with this tied to her collar." The note was in our familiar block letters. Even the most careful creatures can find themselves in dangerous heights. Miss Candle should remember that some falls are arranged, and some landings are not as soft as expected. The performance continues. "Your devoted admirer." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. In our years together, I'd learned to recognize the signs of Wolfe's particular brand of cold anger, the kind that led to methodical, devastating retaliation. "Your cat is unharmed?" he asked. "Physically, yes. But whoever took her knew she hates strangers and confined spaces. They used a proper carrier and handled her gently. This wasn't cruelty. It was calculated psychological pressure." Wolfe studied the note without touching it. "Someone wished to demonstrate their ability to reach into your private space while showing intimate knowledge of your vulnerabilities. They have made this personal, Miss Candle, which is a mistake they will soon regret." The strategic response. "You will remain here until this evening's gathering," Wolfe continued. "Fritz will prepare the south room. Your cat may stay in the kitchen, where Fritz will spoil her unconscionably. Archie will retrieve whatever materials you need from your studio and place our tactical documents." After settling Miss Candle upstairs with Fritz fussing over Duchess like a grandfather with a new grandchild, I headed out to execute Wolfe's carefully orchestrated plan. Saul Panzer and Ori Cather were already in position, Saul monitoring the theater's entrances, Ori blending into the backstage chaos like a method actor researching a role. The theater under surveillance. The Regent lyric buzzed with the controlled panic of a production in crisis. Tommy Raish met me at the stage door with the hollow-eyed look of a man who had run out of coffee and was considering stronger stimulants. "Someone reset every lighting cue in the system last night," he said, leading me through corridors that smelled of sawdust and anxiety. "Nothing dangerous, but everything shifted just enough to throw off the timing. Tamsin's been screaming about shadows, Greaves rewriting blocking, and Morrow's threatening to postpone opening night." I placed the first document in Tommy's desk drawer while he supervised a crew checking the fly gallery. The envelope lay there like bait in a trap, waiting for the right mouse to take the cheese. From there, I moved to Morrow's offices, where the receptionist's professional smile couldn't quite hide her nervousness. Leo Brix's inbox sat behind glass like a museum exhibit, and I slipped the second envelope into the stack while she took a phone call that required her full attention. The studio visit. Ruth Candle's studio showed signs of recent, careful search. Not the crude ransacking of a burglar, but the methodical examination of someone looking for specific information. I placed the third envelope under the glass, protecting her scale model, where it lay like a secret waiting to be discovered. Nell Pritchard, Candle's assistant, watched me with the knowing expression of someone who had seen enough mysteries to recognize when another one was being set in motion. "Let me guess," she said, wiping her hands on a rag that had seen better machinery. "This is one of those things where you hope the rat grabs it and runs." "If they do," I replied, "we've got cats." The reactions. Begin. By the time I returned to the brownstone, our surveillance network was already producing results. Saul's first report was characteristically economical. Brix took the bait, opened in elevator, pocketed, to Bryant Park. Wolfe read the note, grunted, and had Fritz fetch the ultraviolet light we kept for examining orchids and checking currency. Under the black light, a faint halo appeared around the envelope from Brix's inbox, invisible traces of the powder we dusted it with. The phone rang. Tamsin Vale's voice carried its usual theatrical warmth, but with an undercurrent of genuine concern. "Mr. Wolfe, a curiosity. A gentleman from the press just called asking if I could comment on a private detective blowing up Act 2 for publicity." The phrase was too polished to be spontaneous. "From which publication?" Wolfe asked. He didn't say. He did call me darling, which eliminates 3/4 of them. After she hung up, Wolfe turned to me with the expression of a chess master who had just seen his opponent's next 3 moves. "Mr. Morrow is attempting to control the narrative, or Mr. Brix is. Either way, they are trying to frame tonight's gathering as publicity-seeking rather than investigation." The net tightens. Saul's next report confirmed our suspicions. Brix met with Cogan in Bryant Park. Handoff of documents. Cogan went downtown. I'm following. Ori reports movement at the theater. Grieve examined Tommy's desk but didn't open the drawer. Tommy touched it twice without opening. Miss Vale looked at it and asked for water. "And the studio?" Wolfe asked. "Next on my list," Saul replied. "But one more thing. Someone left another calling card under your front stoop flower box. A bent crimp sleeve from the theater rigging, placed where you'd find it during your evening walk." Wolfe's mouth compressed into a thin line. "Our correspondent continues to treat my house as their stage. Tonight, Archie, we shall demonstrate the difference between amateur theatrics and professional detection." The final positioning. As evening approached, Fritz announced that all our invited guests had confirmed their attendance for 8 o'clock. The stage was set, the traps were laid, and our mysterious correspondent had revealed more about themselves through their reactions than they realized. "Someone in that theater believes they are directing this entire performance," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer with deliberate calm. They have manipulated their colleagues, violated my house, threatened my client, and presumed to use my investigation as part of their elaborate deception. He paused, studying the bent crimp sleeve that had been left as a calling card. Tonight, they will discover that involving Nero Wolfe in their theatrical schemes was the most expensive mistake of their career. The final act begins at 8 o'clock, and this time, I will write the ending. The brownstone settled into its evening quiet, but the calm was deceptive. Upstairs, Ruth Candle was safe with her rescued cat. Outside, our surveillance network maintained its watch. And in the office, Nero Wolfe prepared to demonstrate why even the cleverest criminals eventually discover that some stages are more dangerous than others. The curtain was about to rise on the final act, and our mysterious correspondent was about to learn the difference between directing a play and controlling reality. At 7 minutes before 8, the office had been transformed into what Fritz would later describe as a courtroom disguised as a drawing room. The red leather chair held court, while 4 additional seats formed a careful semicircle, close enough for Wolfe to observe every facial expression, far enough apart to prevent conspiratorial whispers. The brass globe caught the lamplight like a spotlight waiting for its cue, and I had positioned myself with a clear view of both the assembled suspects and the door. They arrived with the punctuality of actors who knew their careers depended on this performance. Laidlaw Morrow entered first, his producer's smile strained at the edges like a curtain pulled too tight. Leo Brix followed, clutching his briefcase with the grip of a man holding his last defense against bankruptcy. Tamsin Vale made her entrance with the fluid grace that had made her a star, choosing the chair closest to Wolfe's desk with calculated precision. Marston Grieve arrived exactly on time, his playwright's eye measuring the room's geometry as if planning to rewrite the scene for better dramatic effect. The stage is set. Wolfe waited until they were settled, then began without preamble. Ladies and gentlemen, one of you has spent considerable effort orchestrating an elaborate deception that encompasses both theatrical sabotage and personal vendetta. You have manipulated your colleagues, violated my house, stolen evidence from my desk, and presumed to treat this investigation as part of your performance. This evening, we shall determine which of you has been directing this drama from the shadows. The silence that followed had weight to it, like the moment before a curtain rises on opening night. Mr. Brix, Wolfe continued, his gaze settling on the accountant with surgical precision. You hired Hugh Cogan to monitor my premises and report on my movements. Mr. Cogan has been most cooperative in describing your instructions and documenting your payments. Brix's knuckles whitened around his briefcase handle. Surveillance is a legitimate business practice when protecting investor interests. It becomes conspiracy when combined with other activities. Wolfe cut him off. Such as purchasing specialized rigging chain from Greenpoint Rigging using cash and specific technical specifications that could only have come from stolen drawings. The evidence unfolds. I produced the receipt from Greenpoint Rigging, along with Saul's photographs of Brix's meeting with Cogan in Bryant Park. Quarter-inch links with G crimp sleeves, I said. Ordered for theatre, line 14. The exact specifications for the secondary batten that was designed but never installed due to budget constraints. Morrow turned to stare at his business manager. Leo, what is this about? Before Brix could answer, Wolfe continued his methodical dismantling. Mr. Grieve, you claimed yesterday that you avoid the fly gallery and don't tempt gravity personally. Yet witnesses place you there last week, engaged in heated discussion with Tommy Riche about cue timing. A curious contradiction for a man who prides himself on precision. Grieve's composure cracked slightly. I was ensuring the integrity of my artistic vision. You were reconnoitering the rigging system, Wolfe corrected. Just as you reconnoitered Miss Candle's studio during your late-night visit with Miss Vale, ostensibly to study sight lines, but actually to examine technical drawings that would later be stolen. the trap revealed. Tamsin Vale leaned forward, her actress's instincts recognizing a crucial scene. "Mr. Wolfe, if you're suggesting that Marston and I conspired to sabotage our own production—" "I'm suggesting that you were used," Wolfe replied. "Your visit to the studio provided cover for someone else's reconnaissance. Your presence gave legitimacy to what was actually criminal preparation." He gestured toward me. "Archie, the documents." I produced 3 envelopes, our tactical documents with their microscopic variations. We placed these strategically yesterday, one in Tommy Reich's desk, one in Mr. Brix's inbox, and one in Miss Candle's studio. Each was designed to test our suspects' reactions and reveal their methods. Wolfe's eyes moved systematically across the assembled faces. "Mr. Brix, you opened the envelope from your inbox while in an elevator, then immediately contacted your surveillance operative. Miss Vale, you visited the studio and removed documents, though you claim it was for costume renderings. Mr. Grieve, you examined Tommy's desk but didn't open the drawer, suggesting you knew it contained a trap. The personal motive. But the most revealing reaction," Wolfe continued, "came from someone who recognized my handwriting on the original anonymous note. Someone who had seen it before, in a different context, and harbored resentment over that previous encounter." The room fell silent except for the steady tick of the mantel clock. 3 years ago, Mr. Grieve, you submitted a manuscript to Meridian Publications claiming it was based on a true crime. The publisher, suspicious of certain inconsistencies, consulted me about its authenticity. I determined that you had fabricated the entire story, appropriating details from actual cases to create a fictional narrative you were attempting to pass off as fact. My report ended your relationship with that publisher and damaged your reputation in certain literary circles. Grieve's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. "That proves nothing about this situation." "It proves motive," Wolfe replied. "When Miss Valor showed you the first anonymous note, you recognized my handwriting and saw an opportunity for revenge disguised as artistic crisis. You enlisted Mr. Brix, who had his own financial motivations for wanting the production to fail or be postponed. The methodology exposed. Your plan was elegant in its complexity," Wolfe continued. "Create a series of mysterious incidents that would force Miss Valor to hire an investigator. Ensure that investigator would be me by including my name in the anonymous correspondence. Then sabotage both the production and the investigation, discrediting both Miss Valor's management and my detective work while positioning yourself to profit from the chaos." I stepped forward with the final piece of evidence. The handwriting analysis confirms it. The anonymous notes were written by someone familiar with theatrical spacing and measurement, but the letter formation matches samples from your manuscript submissions, Mr. Grieve. You disguised your natural hand, but certain unconscious habits remained consistent. The confession. Grave stood slowly, his theatrical composure finally abandoning him. "You think you understand everything, don't you, Wolfe? You destroyed my career with that report, ruined my reputation over a technicality." "I exposed deliberate fraud," Wolfe corrected. "You attempted to profit from fabricated tragedy." "And you profited from exposing it." Grieve's voice rose with genuine anger. "So when I saw an opportunity to return the favor, to show the great Nero Wolfe stumbling around in the dark while I pulled the strings, yes, I took it. I planned every note, every incident, every moment of confusion. I wanted you to fail as publicly as I did." Brix, realizing his position was hopeless, slumped in his chair. "He promised me the insurance payout would cover my losses on other investments. Said it would look like natural business failure, not fraud." Justice served. At that moment, Fritz opened the office door to admit Inspector Kramer, who had been listening from the hallway along with Ruth Candle and Saul Panzer. The inspector stepped forward with handcuffs and the weary expression of a man who had seen too many clever criminals outsmart themselves. "Marston Grave, Leo Brix, You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, breaking and entering, and criminal mischief," Kramer announced. "You have the right to remain silent." As our theatrical conspirators were escorted from the brownstone, Grieve turned back for one final dramatic gesture. "You may have won this round, Wolfe, but the theater will always need villains more than heroes." "Perhaps," Wolfe replied, reaching for his beer with deliberate calm. "But it will always need truth more than performance." The aftermath. After the police departed with their prisoners, the office felt larger somehow, as if the removal of deception had created more space for honest conversation. Ruth Candle emerged from the hallway with Duchess in her arms, both looking considerably more relaxed than they had in days. "The production will go on," she announced. "Celia's already called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. We'll need a new playwright, but the sets are sound, the cast is committed, and the investors are relieved to know their money wasn't funding criminal enterprise." Tamsin Vale, who had remained silent throughout the arrests, finally spoke. "I should have seen it. Marston was too helpful, too eager to accommodate every change and crisis. Real artists fight for their vision. They don't adapt to chaos quite so smoothly." Morrow nodded grimly. "I'll need to find a new business manager, obviously, and probably a new insurance company, given the circumstances." As our remaining guests prepared to leave, Wolfe offered his final observation. "The theater, I'm told, is built on the willing suspension of disbelief. Mr. Grieve's error was in believing that principle extended to criminal investigation. In my experience, the truth requires no suspension of disbelief. It simply requires the patience to let it emerge." Curtain call. After they departed, I settled into my chair with a beer of my own and watched Wolfe return to his orchid catalogues as if nothing more dramatic than a routine consultation had just concluded. "So," I said, "satisfied with your performance?" He glanced up with the slightest suggestion of a smile. "Archie, I do not perform. I detect. The distinction, as Mr. Greve discovered, is crucial." Outside, the October night had turned crisp and clear. Inside the brownstone, order had been restored, justice had been served, and Fritz was already planning a celebration dinner that would probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The secret behind the curtains had been revealed, the theater was safe, and Nero Wolfe had once again proved that some stages are more dangerous than others, particularly when they attempt to include him in their cast without his permission. The curtain had fallen on our theatrical mystery, and this time everyone knew who had written the ending. The morning after brought the kind of crisp October clarity that makes New York feel scrubbed clean by overnight rain. I was enjoying my second cup of Fritz's coffee and the morning paper's account of our theatrical arrests, buried on page 6 between a water main break and a mayoral candidate's promise to fix everything, when the phone rang with the persistence of unfinished business. The aftermath unfolds. Saul checked in first with the kind of economical report that makes him worth every penny of his considerable fee. "Cogan sang like a baritone with a mortgage," he said. He moved the cat under Brix's instructions, delivered notes on Graves' schedule, and kept that grey sedan parked outside your place for 3 days running. The late-night studio visit was Tamsin and Grieve together, but she went back alone later to retrieve our planted envelope at his urgent request. Delivered it to him at the Carillon bar, where he performed surprise with the care of a man blowing on hot soup. "The basement entry?" I asked. "Cogan had a key copied from our locksmith's van 6 months ago. Graves' idea. He'd been planning this revenge since he learned you were still in business. The furnace panel note was Cogan's attempt at wit." After Saul hung up, I found Wolfe in his office, apparently absorbed in orchid catalogues, but actually savoring the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching elaborate schemes collapse under their own pretensions. The client's gratitude. Celia Valla arrived at 10:30, wearing relief like a coat that finally fit properly. She settled into the red leather chair where last night's confrontation had unfolded and gave the room the kind of glance a ship's captain reserves for safe harbor. "I need to understand something," she said without preamble. "How did you know it was Grieve from the beginning?" Wolfe set down his catalogue with deliberate precision. "I didn't know, Miss Valor. But I recognized the psychological signature. Someone was orchestrating events with theatrical precision while harboring a personal grievance against me. The combination suggested either a former client with artistic pretensions or an artist with a criminal grudge." The detection methodology. "Your saboteur made several critical errors," Wolfe continued, "that revealed both his identity and his methods. First, he assumed theatrical training would translate to criminal expertise. Mr. Grieve understood dramatic tension and audience manipulation, but failed to grasp that criminal investigation operates by different principles than artistic criticism. I looked up from my notes. He got too clever. Started believing his own performance." "Precisely. Second, he allowed personal resentment to override strategic thinking. A purely mercenary saboteur would have remained anonymous and focused on financial gain. Mr. Grieve couldn't resist, involving me personally, which provided both motive and means for identification." Wolfe reached for his beer with the satisfaction of a chess master explaining a particularly elegant checkmate. But his most revealing error was assuming that technical expertise would mask psychological transparency. He understood theater mechanics, rigging systems, curtain weights, timing cues. What he failed to understand was that every criminal leaves a signature in their thinking patterns. The pattern recognition. "Consider the escalation," Wolfe elaborated. "Obsessive precision disguised as random mischief. Every incident was calculated for maximum psychological impact with minimum physical damage. The initial notes placed where they'd be discovered but not understood. The curtain weights altered just enough to create concern without catastrophe. The stolen drawings returned in modified form, like a playwright revising his own work. Each incident built on the previous with narrative structure that comes naturally to someone who thinks in dramatic arcs." Miss Valor nodded slowly. "He was writing a script." "Exactly. And like all writers, he couldn't resist leaving his mark on every scene. The personal touches, Fritz's displaced spices, the stolen evidence from Archie's desk, the cat kidnapping, pure theatrical flourish. He was directing a performance where he cast himself as the unseen puppet master, watching his enemies dance to his script." The fatal flaw. "His fatal error," Wolfe continued, "was believing I would react according to his expectations. He assumed violating my house would anger me into rash action, that stealing evidence would frustrate me into mistakes, that threatening my client would pressure me into abandoning the case. Instead, each provocation provided additional data about his psychology and methods." The phone rang, interrupting our analysis. Tamsin Vale's voice carried theatrical warmth undercut by genuine embarrassment. "Mr. Wolfe, I owe you an apology. I should have seen through Marston's performance. Real artists fight for their vision. They don't adapt to chaos quite so smoothly." "Miss Vale," Wolfe replied, "you acted under false pretenses. Your error was credulity, not complicity. That is the truth. Publish it as you see fit." After she hung up, he turned back to Miss Valor. "Mr. Grieve believed he could manipulate me like a character in one of his plays. He discovered that reality operates by different rules than fiction. That discovery cost him his freedom and what remained of his reputation." The professional resolution. Inspector Kramer arrived at noon to harvest what he'd planted, standing 5 feet from Wolfe's desk with hat in hand and cigar in pocket, as close to homage as he gets. "Grieve's prints are on 3 of the notes and the stolen onion skin," he reported. "Bricks signed the cash receipt at Greenpoint Rigging with his left hand, and a fake name. We've got video. Grainy, but the ears don't lie. Kogan had your stolen evidence in his glove compartment under a map nobody uses." "Their defense?" I asked. Grieve claims it was all commentary on the economics of art. Says he wanted the production to fail, investors to panic, insurance to pay out, and a revised version of The Secret to be picked up cheap by another producer who had a side deal waiting. Art as crowbar, basically. Wolfe's expression carried the distaste of a gourmet discovering sawdust in his soufflé. He lacks originality, even in rationalization. The personal touch. Ruth Candle appeared at 4 o'clock with Duchess in a traveling basket and a pie from a bakery that doesn't advertise. The cat allowed me to stroke her ear as long as I maintained proper altitude and humility, while Ruth set her offering on Fritz's counter like tribute to a benevolent deity. "We'll be back in the Fly Gallery by morning," she reported. "Tommy's double-checking every sleeve and crimp. The secondary batten stays cut. Sometimes budget constraints are acts of divine intervention." "You were never properly framed," I told her. "Just smudged around the edges." She smiled with the relief of someone whose professional reputation had been restored. Grieve could draw lines perfectly. He never understood edges. The philosophical conclusion. At 6 o'clock, with the house cleared and justice properly served, Wolfe permitted himself beer and the kind of reflective mood that follows successful intellectual combat. I took mine at my desk and watched him settle into the contemplation that always follows a case's resolution. "You were right that first morning about the note," I said. "Ask Mr. Wolfe what is sewn to keep it straight." It was the lead chain in the curtain hem. "Not merely that," he replied. "The line sewn into a curtain ensures a true fall. It doesn't announce itself. It exerts weight, not noise. Our correspondent wished to suggest that his hidden cunning governed the visible surface. He mistook cleverness for ballast. And the line nobody hears, and yet everybody obeys." Wolfe's mouth twitched with something approaching a smile. "Conscience, if you prefer the word. Failing that, the law. Failing both, the accumulated weight of reality, which drags pretense level whether it will or no." The final assessment. Fritz announced dinner with the pride of a man who had survived invasion and restored proper order to his domain. Over pheasant in a reduction that tasted like forgiveness and a chestnut puree that could make bishops reconsider doctrine, Wolfe offered his final observation on the case. "Art," he said, cutting his meat with surgical precision, "aims to reveal truth through contrivance. Fraud aims to conceal truth with contrivance. The difference is not superficial, it is moral. When fraud borrows art's tools, it expects the same indulgence without the same accountability. Mr. Grieve wanted the privileges of art while practicing the ethics of theft. That is a vulgarity Einstein's tires cannot abide." "He said theatre needs villains more than heroes," I reminded him. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow with the authority of final judgment. "Theatre needs characters, Archie. Life needs standards." The return to order. Later, walking Fritz to the door, he claims he can't sleep unless I confirm the street is quiet, I found myself reflecting on the case's peculiar satisfaction. The grey sedan had vanished, the stoop bore no bent metal calling cards, and the brownstone had returned to being what it was meant to be, a fortress of intellectual order in a chaotic world. Back in the office, I filed away the evidence, curtain samples, receipts, photographs, the corner of onion skin we'd preserved, in the drawer that had been violated and was now vindicated. I locked it, pocketed the key, and gave Wolfe a look that asked whether the curtain had truly fallen. His eyes were half closed, which with him means fully alert. "Archie," he said, "tomorrow we will work. Tonight we will digest." "Digest what?" I asked. "Dinner or the lesson?" He allowed me the smallest of smiles. "Both, and in the proper order." I turned out the lights and left him to his contemplation. The office settled into its evening quiet, and somewhere upstairs, a cat that had been abducted from her home and restored to it chose the softest cushion and did what cats do best, found the true line, curled to it, and slept. The secret behind the curtains had been revealed. Justice had been served with characteristic precision, and Nero Wolfe had once again proved that some stages are more dangerous than others, particularly when they attempt to include unwilling participants in their cast without permission. The final curtain had fallen, and everyone knew who had written the ending. The morning after brought the kind of crystalline November air that makes Manhattan feel scrubbed clean by Providence. I was enjoying Fritz's coffee and the peculiar satisfaction that comes from reading about your own case in the morning paper, buried on page 8 between a water main break and the mayor's latest promise to fix everything that's wrong with the world, when the phone rang with news that would close our theatrical chapter properly. The practical aftermath. Inspector Kramer's voice carried the weary satisfaction of a man who had filed his last report on a case that had actually made sense. "Grev got 18 months plus restitution," he said without preamble. "Bricks drew 12 months and permanent exile from anything involving other people's money. Kogan lost his license and got 6 months for breaking and entering. The DA's happy, the theater's happy, and I can go back to murders that don't require a program to understand." After he hung up, I found Wolfe in his office, apparently absorbed in a seed catalogue, but actually savoring the kind of intellectual satisfaction that comes from watching elaborate schemes collapse under their own pretensions. The morning mail had brought 3 envelopes bearing theatrical letterheads. Gratitude expressed in the proper form, which in our house means checks that clear and thank you notes that don't gush. The theater restored, Celia Valla called at 10:30 to report that The Secret would open on schedule with a new playwright, a revised script, and what she described as the kind of creative energy that comes from surviving genuine crisis. The replacement writer, Sarah Chen, had kept the best of Grev's structure while giving the characters actual motivations instead of mechanical plot functions. "We'd like you both at opening night," she said. "Front row center, our treat." Wolfe's expression suggested he'd rather attend his own autopsy, so I accepted for myself and promised to bring whoever keeps me honest, which in this case would be my notebook and a healthy skepticism about artistic endeavors. The professional assessment. That evening, I found myself in the unlikely position of voluntarily attending the theater. The Regent Lyric had been transformed from a battlefield into what it was meant to be, a place where talented people told stories to other people who wanted to hear them. No mysteries, no sabotage, no elaborate deceptions, just professional theater operating as it should. Tamsin Vale commanded the stage with authority earned rather than assumed. Ruth Candle's sets created the kind of dramatic frames that made every entrance feel significant, her burgundy curtains falling with perfect precision and no unauthorized waits. Tommy Raish called cues without blinking, and the grand drape flew square as a promise kept. During intermission, I cornered Ruth near her technical drawings, which were displayed in the lobby like battle plans that had won the war. "How's the new business manager working out?" Janet Morrison actually understands that theater is a creative enterprise, not just a series of line items, she replied, raising her champagne glass in a toast to competence. "She's already negotiating our spring season." The return to order. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe exactly where I'd left him, apparently reading about orchid cultivation, but actually waiting for my report, with the patience of a cat watching a promising mouse hole. "Well," he said without looking up. "Professional theater," I replied, settling into my chair with a beer that Fritz had left precisely where I'd wanted. No mysteries, no hidden agendas, no elaborate schemes, just people working together to tell a story honestly. You'd have hated every minute of it. Pfui. But his tone carried satisfaction rather than disgust. Miss Valla's enterprise survived its contamination? Thriving. The new playwright actually improved the script, the cast found their proper rhythm, and Ruth Candle's technical work got a standing ovation during curtain call. Order restored through professional standards, exactly as it should be. The philosophical conclusion. Wolfe set down his catalogue with the deliberate precision of a man reaching a satisfactory conclusion. Mr. Grieve possessed technical skill, but lacked artistic integrity, Archie. He understood the mechanics of theatre, but not its purpose. His fundamental error was believing that creating fiction qualified him to manipulate reality. He thought he was writing a tragedy, I observed, but ended up writing a police report. Indeed, and a predictable one. He confused performance with truth, stagecraft with substance. The theatre requires willing suspension of disbelief from its audience. Life demands persistent application of belief in reality. Mr. Grieve's tragedy was his inability to distinguish between the two. Fritz appeared with the evening mail, including a photograph from opening night showing the entire cast and crew assembled for curtain call. A note from Celia Valor was attached. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for proving that some secrets are worth revealing. The theatre endures, truth prevails, and order is restored. Wolfe studied the photograph with the attention he usually reserved for prize orchids. Satisfactory, he pronounced. They appear to have learned the difference between performance and deception. The final curtain. As I prepared the day's final reports, I found myself thinking about the peculiar satisfaction this case had provided. We'd exposed a conspiracy, restored order to a small corner of the theatrical world, and demonstrated once again that involving Nero Wolfe in elaborate criminal schemes is invariably a mistake. One thing still puzzles me, I said, filing away the last evidence. Grave had already discovered you're thorough enough to expose literary fraud. What made him think criminal fraud would be any different? Wolfe's answer came with the finality of a judge delivering sentence. Pride, Archie. He believed his previous failure was due to insufficient preparation rather than fundamental dishonesty. He thought better planning would produce different results. He was wrong. Later, making my final rounds, I paused at the office door to observe Wolfe in his evening contemplation. The case files were closed, justice properly served, and somewhere in the city, honest artists were creating honest work without fear of sabotage or deception. The secret behind the curtains had been revealed, the theatre was thriving, and the brownstone stood ready for whatever drama tomorrow might bring to its door. But that, as they say in the theatre, is another story entirely.